Welcome back to Let's Make a Game, a channel about making computer role-playing games using the free program Twine and the Sugarcube format for Twine. In this video, I'm going to show you a new way to set up your game, which will allow you to test the game a lot more quickly and easily than you could otherwise, and therefore which will allow you to make the game more balanced. Or to make the game harder or easier as you choose. Alright, so I have a little demonstration game set up here, and I have the two buttons, as you can see, that say play or test. In this video we're only going to look at the play side of things, and then in the next video we'll look at how testing works. So I'm going to choose play, and we have 4 pictures, each of which represents a different species that you can choose for your player character. So we have a human, a dwarf, an elf, and a gnome. And let's say I choose a human. And then we are presented with this text which says you must get across the river, and we have 2 options: wade across the river or cross the bridge. If you have been following my series for a while, you might recognize this as being the same as another demonstration game that I had called The Bridge. I've basically just copied that for this. Alright, so let's say I choose to wade across the river. It says you make it across, you have won, the end. And of course, if I made different choices and if I had a different species chosen for my player character, then the result would have been different. Not much of a game, but it's just set up for demonstration purposes. So as I say, in this video I'm going to show you how I have set it up, and in the next video we'll look at how you can use this setup for testing. Now, this way of setting it up is much more complicated than how you would normally expect it to work, but then that allows you to do the testing. So what you'd probably expect, if you're reasonably familiar with Twine, is something like you'd have, let's say you'd have a single page which sets up all the variables. Then you might have another page where you choose which species you want. Then you might have another page which presents you with the choice, and then you might have 2 more pages. You might have one page for if the player chooses to wade across the river, and another page for if the player chooses to cross via the bridge. As you can see, we have considerably more pages than that, but it is necessary to allow the testing. So let's go through this. We start with initialize. The main thing that I'm going to talk about, I'm not going to talk about so much how I set up the 4 portraits and how I put the portrait in the sidebar, because I've done that sort of thing in previous videos and I don't want to repeat myself too much. So if you don't know how that works, and if you are interested in knowing how that works, I would refer you to earlier videos in this series. If you can't find the relevant videos, just comment on this one or any other, and I'll point you to what you need. But the main thing that we have here is the S array. What we've done is we've put most of the game in a 2-dimensional array, where one of the dimensions is like a page or a paragraph. If we think about it as being like a choose your own adventure book, it might be, we think of each of these little entries as a page, and then each of the details of that page is in a separate array. So the first thing, we have the text that is displayed, or we have the phrase no text to indicate there's no text. Then we have what type of paragraph it is, and what I mean by that is you might have some paragraphs where the player makes a choice. You might have some where it's the end of the game and the player wins, and others where it's the end of the game, the player loses. Some where it automatically goes to a new paragraph. Some where you have branching based on the player character's species. So the character creation isn't isn't in this. This is the sort of the game after character creation, I suppose. So let's go through the types of paragraph that I've defined. There are, of course, a lot more than these that are possible, but these are the ones that I've done for the demonstration. So the way it works, we set up S as an array, and then we do another set command for each of the pages or paragraphs that we're going to set up. And you notice that in this case they have names, like it's text. I've said set $S square bracket quote start quote. I could have used numbers instead, and you could use numbers as well as words. Just choose whatever's. There's not a lot of difference because the player doesn't ever get to see the names of these paragraphs, so it's just for your own reference and for anyone else who might be looking at the code. Just do whatever you find easiest. And the big thing is to make sure that you don't have the same name or number more than once, of course, because that will make the game not work the way that you want it to. Let's say that we had another paragraph called Wade down here. Later in the game there was another river or something and they chose to raid across it, and we put different data in. That would just overwrite that would overwrite the data in the original Wade, and so when we got to the first Wade it wouldn't do what you wanted it to do. Something would happen that wasn't what you wanted. So you might want to do one way to avoid repetition is you might have something like this. We might have, let's say, S4, but then S4 might go to, instead of going to S5 or S6, you might say S4 goes to S4.1 and S4.2 and S4.3, for example, and then S4.2 might go to S4.2.1 and 4.2.2 and 4.2.3, etc. And then as the game continues, 4.2.3.1 might take you to 6 or whatever it may be. But again, whatever is easiest for you. I haven't put these in alphabetical order because there's so few of them, but if I was doing a really long game, like a proper game-sized game, I probably would put them in alphabetical order, and that would probably mean that I would use that sub, like I'd have bridge, or let's say start. I might have start go to start.wade and start.swim or start.river, something like that. And that would allow me to have it in alphabetical order, but also keep related choices close together, so it's a bit easier to see what's going on. Anyway, so we have S. The first bit is just the name of the page or paragraph, and then we have the array that tells you all you need to know about the paragraph. The first entry 0 in this array, is either the text that is to be displayed, or it is the phrase no text, which tells the computer obviously not to print any text. Then we have what sort of paragraph it is, and then what follows depends on what sort of paragraph it is. So let's go through the different types. It might say lose, like this one. This one here says lose. Oh my goodness, I'm having trouble selecting something. There we go. This paragraph here, it has lose as its type, and there's no more data needed if it's lose. Lose just means that the game ends and the character is deemed to have lost. And of course we have an opposite to that, which is win, which ends the game but the player has won. We have cont, short for continue, which means that after displaying the text we go straight to another paragraph. And so the next entry after the word cont would be what would be the paragraph to go to. I actually don't have any examples of this in the game. I just put it in because it's a common thing that you have in choose your own adventure type branching narratives. And we have choose, where the player has a choice. And this one's the most complicated one. The next entry after the word choose is how many choices. And after that, you have the text for the first choice, and then the destination for the first choice, and then you have the text and the destination for all of the other choices. So here is an example of that. You must get across the river, choose. There are 2 choices, and the text for the first one will be wade across the river and will take you to Wade if the player chooses it. And the second choice is cross the bridge and takes you to Bridge if the player chooses it. And of course, if we had 3 instead of 2, then we would have another bit of text and another destination. And then we have race, which is branching based on whether the player chose to be a human, dwarf, elf, or gnome. And we have this array here where we have human, dwarf, elf, gnome, and we have the destinations in that order. So, for example, here in the paragraph Wade, we have no text, and then it says race. So this is a choice, an automatic choice based on the player character's species, and it means a human will go to the paragraph make it, a dwarf will go to the paragraph drown, an elf will go to the paragraph make it, and a gnome will go to the paragraph drown. And as you might expect, drown is where you lose and make it is where you win. And if we had more races up here, then we'd obviously have to have more descriptions of where to go for the extra races. Now, of course, you could, and a normal game, a real game, definitely would, have more types than this. You might have random branching. You might say roll a die, or roll the equivalent of a die, and go to one of these 3 paragraphs, each with an equal chance. Or you might say go to these 3 paragraphs, but have half the time go to this one, and a third of the time go to this one, and then otherwise go to that one. You might have combat. If you have a set combat system, you might have combat, and then the next bits of data would probably be the name of the monster, how many there are, and their various stats, and then the paragraph to go to once you'd killed them, or something like that. You might have a paragraph where you roll against a given attribute, and then the data would be probably the name of the attribute, where you go if you succeed in the roll, where you go if you fail in the roll. Maybe you'd have a slot which is the difficulty of the roll, if that's part of your game system, and so on. You'd have branching that's based on whether you have an item, and you might have another type that tells you that you gain an item and then go to something else. But we don't have those yet. We just have this very simple set of 5, and in fact we only use 4 of them in the game. This one is never used. So what we do is very straightforward. We if the player chooses to, at the bottom of this this code, we have 2 buttons, one of which is to choose to play and one of which is to choose to test. And if we choose play, we go to the page play, appropriately enough. I'm not going to deal with story caption because that's just where it displays the player character's portrait, and I've already dealt with that, as I said. And play is very simple in and of itself. This is just printing all of the pictures that represent the different player characters, and then you get to click on one, and which one you click on sets a value to the variable k. Again, I've done stuff like that before, so I won't go through that in detail. This page run is sort of the heart of it. This and all of these different individual pages for the different types of paragraph is really the heart of how this works. So run, again, it's very simple. We print the paragraph text if there is any, and then we go to the page whose name corresponds to the next entry in the array. So if $S $P 0 does not equal, that's what exclamation mark equals means. If it does not equal the phrase no text, then print it and put a couple of line breaks after it so that the text isn't all run together. And then include $S, $P1. In other words, go to whichever of these paragraphs is in the array. So if the array says, sorry, I'll just close that one. Goodness, it's not opening. There we go. If the array says win, go to page that's named win. If it says choose, go to the page that's called choose, and so on. Unfortunately, that doesn't make arrows appear. If you're having include like that, having it as the value of a variable rather than some set text, it means that on this screen you won't get an arrow between run and the different pages. And then what we do depends on what type of paragraph it is. Win and lose are quite simple. You can actually see the code there, so I won't open the pages. Just give the message you have won, a couple of line breaks, and say the end. Lose is the same, except it says you have lost. Break, the end. Race, we set P equal to S, P, K plus 2. So let me give you an example of that. Let's go to an example where we have, this one's an example of race. K is going to be 0, 1, 2, or 3. So K plus 2 is going to be 2, 3, 4, or 5. So if the player character is human, we'll go to this entry in the array, whatever this text is. If they are a dwarf, we'll go to this one. If they are an elf, we'll go to this one. And if they are a gnome, we'll go to this one. And having gone to that paragraph, we then include run, because of course the story is not over. So we go back to run. In fact, we go back to run with all of these, except for the two that are to do with the end of the game. All right, cont is very simple. We just set P equal to S, and I have made a mistake there. It should be $P, but because there is no example of this, it didn't come up, so that's a bit embarrassing. So set $P equals $S, $P 2, and we include run. So we go to the next number. So let's say we had a paragraph that used cont. You might have text like that, then you'd have cont, then you'd go to whatever the paragraph that you... Usually that's to do with when you have various branching and you're sort of joining them up. You have a little message that sort of eases the character into the next bit. So it might be you wander through the forest until you come to a cottage or something like that, and then that takes you to the paragraph cottage, and cottage is a paragraph that you've sort of already written, and so you're sort of tying up loose ends is usually when you get that sort of command, in my experience. And probably the most complicated one is choice. So we have a for loop, and each for loop is going to set up a button, and each button is going to take us to run, but the difference is it will set $P to a different value. So let's go through an example. There's only one choice in this demonstration, so I'll copy that data into here so we can sort of follow along with what's happening. So for z equals 1, z is less than sp2. Well, sp2 is 2, so that means there are two choices, and therefore this for loop is going to execute twice. So this is one of these things where we write all of this code into a variable, and then we print the variable at the very end, because if we tried to do the code at once, it wouldn't. It probably wouldn't work properly. In this particular case, I'm not sure, but I usually, when I'm setting up a button like this, I generally prefer to write it into a variable and then print the variable. So, what would it do? Well, it would start with the code button space quote. That's what that slash under quote means. Then it would add SP Z times 2 plus 1. So Z is the variable that we're using for the for loop. So for the first run through, it would be 3, and then it would be 5, and if there were further choices, it would be 7, 9, 11, and so on. So let's look at 3. Well, 0, 1, 2, 3. That would be wade across the river. And then we have another quote, and we have run, and then we close it off. So up to this point, we would have something like this: button, wade across the river, quote, run. That we would have that text. Then we set y equals y plus, set p equals quote. Then we have sp z times 2 plus 2, and that is the next entry, of course. And in this case, that would be wade. Then we have another quote and those two greater thans. And then we have the end of the button code. So we would end up, and then finally we would print y. So it would print something like this. Make a button. The text on the button is wade across the river. The button sends you to run. If the button is chosen, we set the paragraph to wade, and then this is the end of the button. And then on the next run, it would do something very similar, except it would say, instead of wade across the river, z times 2 plus 2 would be, z times 2 plus 1 would be 5. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And it would say cross the bridge, set p equals bridge, and then slash button. And if there were more choices, it would continue doing that. It would create a button for each choice, and then the player chooses which one they want. And once they click on that button, it sets p, the paragraph, to the relevant value, and then it goes back to run to execute whatever happens based on the contents of that part of the array. And that is how the running the game part of this program works. Of course, it's a very complicated way. Like it's a more complicated version of just a normal game with different pages. The player's experience is going to be exactly the same as if we'd done it the simple and normal way. But the advantage of doing it this way is that we can automatically test the game and get information without having to play it ourselves. We can't do that with a normal, a normally laid out game. And so in the next video, I'll show you how the testing side of it would work, and give you an example of it, and show how it brings out a not so obvious problem in the game that we've already set up. You might have spotted it already, but if not, that's fine. It'll become obvious in the next video. But for now, I hope that was useful or interesting to at least some of you, and I hope you will tune in next time.